Hello, my name is Amanda Miller, and today I'm going to be talking about all the disabilities you can see in the classroom and ways to include these students. So the first of these disabilities would be learning disabilities. This would include things like specific learning disability, which would include students who struggle with understanding or using language that they hear or write. Reading disabilities or dyslexia, which would be students who struggle with seeing the words in front of them, like in the picture, it gets all scrambled in their brain, or having fluent reading. Mathematical disabilities, where they have trouble computing mathematical problems, and memory problems, which can be long, short, or working memory. You can help include these students by providing visuals for them, so that way if they struggle with reading things, that they can see the information instead. Also, you can have use the self-questioning technique, which helps students because they will struggle with acquiring new info a lot of times. So if they ask themselves the questions, it's really helpful to them. You can use graphic organizers, which again organizes the information visually. An example of this would be like a concept map, which is pictured to the right. And also you can provide aids through peer tutors, make sure that the students are getting social interaction to be included, and provide praise. Next, we have communication disorders. This would be speech disorders, language disorders, and cleft lip and palate. For speech disorders, you'd have articulation disorders, where you substitute sounds or omit sounds, apraxia, where you have trouble articulating sounds or getting your articulators to work, voice disorders, where your voice just doesn't sound correct, and fluency disorders, where you'll stutter and have non-fluent speech. And then there's language disorders, which would be difficulty in expressing language and like your vocabulary and stuff, and understanding what is spoken to you. And then there's cleft lip and palate, which you'll either have a hole on one or both sides of your lip, as pictured with the baby, or you'll have a hole in your palate. And then you can include these students by presenting your information in a variety of ways again, allowing the students to present their info in different ways, so use PowerPoints and posters and presentations, all sorts of things, instead of just reading out of the textbook all the time and filling out worksheets. And make sure that these students are included in social activities, especially since communication disorders center so much on like difficulty in communication. And then you can use graphic organizers that the students fill out to help them as well. Some alternate ways to include students would also include using AAC, or alternative and augmentative communication, and this can be on a tablet, such as the picture, board, or other device, and basically it's got pre-programmed sounds or words, and they can use that to communicate, and that would help improve their social skills. And also, if you vary your answers or the way they can answer questions and give them more time, a lot of times that's super helpful to them. And then there's emotional or behavioral disorders, and this would include things like anxiety, where you have a really strong fear of something, mood disorders, where you have depression or bipolar disorder under that, oppositional defiant disorder, where you are angry, you like to bother other people, and you really like to argue, especially with authority figures, and this can be seen in the picture where the kid is pulling on the girl's hair. And then there's conduct disorder, which is basically where you're really destructive toward other people, destructive toward property, you steal stuff, and you'll violate serious rules. And then there's schizophrenia, where you'll have hallucinations, which is you see or hear something that's not there, delusions, or you can freeze in strange positions, which is called catatonic. And then for all of these, there's externalized behaviors, which other people can see, or internalized behaviors, which would be like behaviors you direct inward. So to include these students, it really helps if you use technology to keep track of their behavior. So you can use apps or a sticker chart, that sort of thing, so that they can see how they did that day with their behavior and how they've been doing. And then you can have more difficult tasks in the classroom, so that way sometimes they act out because they're bored or something like that. You could play the good behavior game, where you split the class into teams and you gain or lose points based on behavior that day. And you can include these students by having them use conflict resolution instructions, so teach them how to deal with their behaviors in a positive manner, and you can pair them with other students so that they get the social interaction buddy system, and encourage students to be positive toward each other. And then there's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is pretty well known. Pretty much it's a student who doesn't have very good control over their actions, so they can't sit still, they're talking excessively, they are just moving all the time, like you can see in the picture that kid's moving. And then there's inattentive, where they are really zoned out all the time, they make careless mistakes, they don't pay much attention to what they're doing, and they're super distracted all the time. And there's combined, which has features of both. So to use differential instruction with these students, you can teach them organizational skills, which is super helpful because a lot of times, like in the picture on the right for the backpack, they're super disorganized, and it can help them learn better if they become organized. And then you can teach them goals setting so that they are more motivated if they take breakdown tasks and they make them smaller and then they work their way up to their goal. And you can use different types of therapies to help them, and you can include them more by having other students, pairing them with other students so that way they understand proper social interaction, and you can teach them how to get the students back on task with ADHD, etc., and allow them to be more motivated by letting them work at something they're good on. Next, we have intellectual disabilities, and this is where you have a severe problem with your intellectual functioning. And this would include individuals with an IQ score of 70 or lower, and these would be people with like Down syndrome or Fragile X syndrome, and developmental delays in fetal alcohol spectrum disorder can also cause this. And to help include these students more, you can use something called a Rocket Reader, which is an e-reader that's super easy to use so they can use it. You can teach them functional skills that they can apply to jobs in the community instead of just focusing on a rigorous curriculum all the time. You can let them set their own goals. You can help include them by teaching peers to ignore their incorrect behavior and learning how they like to socialize and socializing with them, and using community-based instruction with peers in it so that way they're not like separated from the school, and using peer educators for instruction. Then there's autism spectrum disorder, which includes difficulty with socializing and understanding social interactions and gestures, difficulty with relationships, making friends. Also, they'll have repetitive behaviors like flapping their hands, rocking, and can be aggressive and injurious to themselves, and can be really sensitive. There's different ways you can help include these students and help them do better in school, and that's by changing your curriculum. So change the way you present the material, focus on subjects they excel on, especially since a lot of times they'll be really good at one or two subjects. You can use mnemonic devices, which is an example of that on the right. You can use keyword strategies, peg words, or words that rhyme, and letter strategies. It's really important that you try to promote friendships with them, especially since they really struggle with social interactions. And you can help include them by having peers understand that they act differently sometimes, pairing students with them, teaching differently, and using peer tutoring with visuals and music that's different from the normal classroom and can help them learn a lot, and using social stories to teach them social aspects. Then there's students with multiple disabilities, which will have two or more significant disabilities. So this could be motor disability and visual impairment, or intellectual disability and hearing impairment, etc. They will have difficulty with adaptive skills or practical skills, their senses, communicating with others, and their motor skills. So to help include these students, you can use smartphones, iPads, or tablets, which if the para-educators are all busy, they will actually be more autonomous, and it will tell them what to do through pictures that they can see and instructions that are read auditorily. And you can also help by having close peers be supportive of them, teach peers how to communicate them when they use AAC, and have peers help them with tasks and have them pick their own goal. There's also physical disabilities, which includes any disorder where they can't move around like most people are able to move around. They might have muscle weakness or involuntary movements, such as in cerebral palsy, or their spinal cord might not close completely, so they might not be able to feel all that we can feel, or they might even be paralyzed. Other health impairments would be things like epilepsy, where they have unprovoked seizures, or asthma, where they have difficulty breathing and can come with attacks, which there's a picture of that down. You can include these students by using larger print, such as what's pictured on the right, so that they can read it better if they have visual impairments. You can use modified equipment so they can participate in PE. You can use technology, which can really help students do their homework and will circle certain words or make words bigger or read it to them. You can teach students ways, or you can study how long or what they're good at and what they need and provide these in the classroom, and you can give them rest periods and make their work shorter if that's what they need, or longer, or whatever. Then there's a traumatic brain injury, or TBI, and this is caused when there's an external force to the head. It can be closed or it can be open, and mild, moderate, or severe, and it will definitely come with memory, problem-solving skill, or difficulty with problem-solving skills, and language skill issues, and can cause physical weakness as well, and there's lots of different causes for it. To help include these students and help them succeed, you can change the way you present your information. So sometimes reading might be a lot more difficult for them than it used to be, so you can present stuff visually. You can have them move physically, which might be easier for them to understand. Sometimes class can be a lot more difficult for them, appear to be moving too fast, so let them take breaks if they need it. You can let them work in a comfortable setting, which especially with accepting peers while they're relearning stuff that they might have forgotten. You can also use group projects, so that way it's not all on them all the time, and you can pair them with a partner to help them focus and help them with any issues they might be having, and you can even give them an alternate rubric, so that way they still understand the expectations of them. Then there's hearing loss, which would include people who might be deaf, which being deaf would mean having a hearing loss of 70 to 90 decibels. These people can't hear speech at all, so they'd have to like read your lips or something like that in order to speak or understand what you're saying. And then there's hard of hearing, which is a hearing loss of 20 to 70 decibels, and this is where they can still kind of communicate with speech. At 20 decibels, it's really not bad. It's just fuzzier, and at 70 decibels, it becomes a lot more difficult. Like the speech has to be really loud, but they can still hear you if you're really loud. And then they might need aid, or learn how to speech read, which is basically lip reading, or use ASL, which is American Sign Language, to communicate with others. And a lot of times, if they can speak when they're deaf or hard of hearing, their voice quality and articulation will be difficult to understand. And yeah. So there's also, to include these students, there's lots of things you can do. You can use a lot more visual activities, so that way they can feel completely included, and they can see what's going on directly. And you could also put speakers in the room especially for the student with a hearing impairment, so that way they can understand what you're saying and they feel included in the lecture. You can also provide the student with opportunities where they can learn American Sign Language and learn about deaf culture, so that way they can get a basis and start communicating with other people who are like them. You can make sure you always integrate new vocabulary, because a lot of times people who've been born with hearing impairments might really struggle to understand all phrases and metaphors that we use and things like that, because they've never heard it actually. You can use a buddy system, and it really helps include them when you teach some ASL signs to the class, so they can use them or understand some basic signs to communicate. And it's very important to make sure that you're always, as a teacher, you're always facing these students with hearing impairments when you're talking, so that they can read your lips, and that they can see, if they have an interpreter, they can see the interpreter and you at the same time, and they're not having to like turn their head back and forth constantly or something like that. Then there's visual impairment or blindness. So normal sight is 20/20 vision, and visual impairment or being legally blind is 20/200 vision. So at 20 feet, they can only see a measure of 200, which is really big, the really big E on the vision chart. And most people who are visually impaired can still see some things, but sometimes their vision will be really blurry, or they can only see like from the sides of their vision perspective, or they can only see in the middle or something like that. There's also different categories. There's low vision, so they can still read print, but they need aids like a magnifying glass or something. There's functionally blind, where they need Braille for reading and writing, but they can still use their eyes for like some tasks like seeing color. And then there's totally blind where there's no visual input at all. And they might use guides such as a walking stick, like is what is pictured, to help them in new locations. And then you can help these students feel included by giving them access to different learning mediums like Braille, print, audio tapes, etc. that they need so that they can still fully participate in the lessons. And it's also important to make sure they're participating in age-appropriate tasks, and you can teach them how to use Braille if they don't know how to, and that sort of thing, so they can still feel included, and provide more explanations for them. Use teaching games that they can play with peers. Make sure that peers always say their name and who they're talking to help them understand what's going on. You can use manipulatives so they can feel what's going on, and yeah, just make sure you always have alternative learning. And then there are gifted students, which are students that are really super smart, have an IQ of greater than 100, and they can be talented in one or more things. They often might have external behaviors because they're bored, and they can also be gifted and disabled. That's possible. And you can help these students feel included by giving them an augmented curriculum, so go into more depth on a subject, or use problems that have higher thinking levels and more complex steps. You can also teach them what it means to be gifted and learn how to pursue their own interests, so that way they won't be as bored if they're learning about something they want to learn about. You can involve other people by creating a challenge box where you create like difficult questions you want answered, and then you can have the gifted students get together and talk about what the answer is. You can allow them to lead class discussions in subjects they're really good at, to build leadership skills. You can have them work at a higher grade level so that way they're not as bored, and you can encourage them to participate in extracurricular events that they might be good at or interested in, such as writing competitions, reading competitions, or like what's pictured like a robotics competition sort of thing.